Welcome, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the Planning Commission on Monday, June 27th, 2022. If we could call the roll.
Commissioner Schaefer. Becky Schaefer,
Aye.
sorry. Commissioner Stoker.
Here.
Commissioner Lemke.
Here.
Commissioner Hawley.
Here.
Commissioner Gentes.
Here.
Commissioner Bach.
Here.
Alderman Parrish.
Here.
Chairman Stralchuk.
Here. I was wondering if you want to call me Alderman or Chair. Just depending. First item on the agenda is approval of the meeting minutes from May 23rd, 2022.
Move to approve. Second.
We got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, all of those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. That passes. Yep. We do have a few more people in the group than we usually do. If there's an item that you wish to speak on, there are registration slips in the back of the room. I would ask that you would fill that out, indicate whether you'd like to speak or not, and then bring them up to Robin, who is at the front desk up here, and she'll bring them up to me so that I can make sure that everyone's being heard on items that they wish to be heard on. Next item on the agenda is a public hearing and consent. Coldbrook Design Incorporated for Brixmore SPEI LLC. The applicant is seeking a conditional use grant approval to allow for a restaurant for the property located at 10990 North Port Washington Road, Tropical Smoothie Cafe.
Motion to open public hearing.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to go into public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are now in public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak on this?
Motion to close public hearing.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to close public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we're out of public hearing. What I'm going to do is, that is a public hearing and then a consent agenda. So what I'm going to look for here is a motion on the next item of regular business, which is the consent agenda. We'll bring up all four unless somebody wishes to remove one from that group and discuss it individually. On the consent agenda, we have Peter Budnick. The applicant is seeking a fill permit approval to allow for 4,850 cubic yards for the property located at 11701 West Friedstadt Road. Next item is Rob Oldenbury for East Mequon IVA LLC. The applicant is seeking a master sign plan amendment to allow for sign location modifications for the properties located at 12100 and 12200 North Corporate Parkway, The Point. And Ganami Mequon, the applicant is seeking a building and site plan amendment approval to allow for a 638 square foot addition to the existing building for the property located at 10813 North Port Washington Road. So I'm looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda and or remove any items that they wish to take up.
So moved.
So moved. Got a motion and a second. All those in favor of the consent agenda?
Aye.
Aye.
I don't think there's discussion. Okay. Did we want to discuss anything? Did I give you all a chance? Okay, let's make sure that we got it all.
Well, I had one question, but I didn't know if it was appropriate from a procedure perspective.
Feel free to ask that, and then if we wish to reconsider that item, we'll be more than happy to do that.
It's very straightforward.
Sure.
For the original item that was on public hearing as well as consent, is that in lieu of the item we discussed last month or in addition to? Same spot,
addition.
just half. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah. I was kind of excited to see that because that's kind of what that was years ago, just two different businesses, a couple doors down. So I'm glad we've got those resources back in the city.
Thank you.
We're on to regular business items. Next item is an ordinance amending Chapter 58 zoning code as it relates to permitted uses in Table 58-301-1 of the Town Center TC zoning district to allow for event planning services with facilities.
Chairman, did you vote on the last?
Yeah, we did.
Oh, I thought you just voted to, okay.
Yeah, we voted in favor for the consent agenda, all four items.
Okay.
But I made a mistake and didn't ask for discussion, so we just had a point of order question and nobody asked to reconsider, so we were moving on to the next item. Cool?
Okay, yep, so I'm taking the item on the text amendment.
Yep.
We're recommending approval. This is really event service event planning services with facilities. If it didn't include facilities, it would just be considered a personal office space, which is also permitted in the district. We're suggesting that in order to be permitted, we regulate the size of it in order to keep it small scale. We certainly wouldn't want the facility component or the storage and warehouse of any of the materials, decorations, that often get distributed, right, to be a larger component of the use than the actual services themselves. There could be other amusement type facilities if we didn't narrowly define this that may not otherwise be appropriate in this particular district. So we're recommending approval, allowing it to be permitted with specific development standards like scale and a control on the amount of storage and warehousing. Your action tonight will be forwarded to the Common Council, both in July and then action in August. There is an applicant hoping to open up a facility in the town center, and it was proposed by that business owner. Thank you.
Great. Commissioners, any questions for staff?
Move to approve.
Second.
Going to motion a second. I do have one question. What, can you highlight what we're doing to address parking for event space?
Well, the town center zoning district doesn't have its separate and distinct zoning, so we would follow the same regulations as we do with any other use in the town center. So we would be looking at this similar to probably an indoor recreational facility. And we'd probably break down the square footage of the use of each individual floor plan that comes forward and make a recommendation that way.
Yeah, my only concern with this one would have been the parking, because if it's an event space that lasts for a period of time and you've got I think we're at 3,000 square feet maximum. You got 3,000 square feet of people coming in to enjoy a facility for an evening. Parking could get tight in spaces. So just understanding what reasonable accommodations would mean for parking for bigger groups and or venues.
Sure. And we, have the opportunity, even though it's a permitted use, we have the opportunity to do that at the time of a building permit application. We review that.
So it wouldn't be unreasonable with the approval as we see it tonight to ask for parking considerations as a permitted use, correct?
Well, the code already addresses parking in a different section of the code.
Correct.
So we would apply that calculation to this use based on the specificity of each proposal that comes forward. That's what we do on all permitted uses.
Okay.
So it would be unusual to single this one use out and come up with different parking standards.
Okay.
So when the business applies, that's when parking would be considered. Because right now we're just doing the zoning code amendment.
Perfect. Makes sense. Excellent. Any other discussion? All right, we got a motion and a second on the table. All of those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? I voted aye. The next item, Quick Trip. The applicant is seeking a minor request approval to allow for a fence for the property located at 10360 North Cedarburg Road. Kim, looks like you've got that one too.
I do. So this is
Are you the applicant? If you could just come up here and you'd like to.
This is after quite a bit of work in some discussions with neighboring properties, as well as discussions with representatives from Quick Trip. What led us to this point, or being able to make these recommendations to the Planning Commission tonight, is really included a joint meeting with staff, the neighbors, as well as representatives from Quick Trip. And it was a great meeting. Everyone just had an opportunity to discuss what impacts were concerning the neighbors. And so there was just really great open dialogue. Staff learned some things that the neighbors were experiencing. And Quick Trip also had an opportunity to explain, maybe why some of those things were happening and how they can better control them. So the impetus for the application was really to seek the installation of a fence. About About 18 months ago, Quick Trip did install a fence. It was only about 6 feet in height. The zoning code limits fences to 6 feet in height, but it wasn't doing the job that it really needed to for the neighbors. And so that fence was removed and this application was made. So we took the opportunity to try to address all of the issues. As it relates specifically to the fence, we're proposing that the fence run along the east property line, but also turn the corners at both the northeast and the southeast corner to kind of control any debris that is traveling across the site. And those properties to the east, to the immediate east, are single-family residential neighborhoods along with the Milwaukee River just immediately adjacent to that. So the idea to kind of turn the corners and wrap those is to help prevent any debris from, traveling around that. The neighbors expressed an interest in a 12-foot tall fence. That was a concern of staff. I think we're still even concerned at, an 8 or 10-foot height as well because of precedent-setting nature. But we do understand the interest in having it a little bit taller. There is a grade a grade difference from the curb line along the east parking lot to where the fence would be located. I would say it's probably about 1.5 to 2 feet. That area of the site contains the vacuum area, which of course is an area where people are unloading all the garbage from their car, and there are like oversized trash cans there. Quick Trip in the last year put additional trash cans out throughout the site to help control this. That area to the southeast also contains their large dumpster area as well as the car wash, and similar to the vacuum operations, the car wash area is an area where people, of course, are cleaning out their vehicle. The shed roof along the, as part of the car wash building is about 10 feet in height, so the car wash facility is taller than that. The dumpster is enclosed in brick and is about 9 feet tall compared to the grade of the parking lot. So I don't know if anybody had a chance to go out there since receiving the report, or if you can familiarize yourself with this just from being out there in the past. There is going to be some green space distance between where the fence is and where some of the more formal area of the site is located. There is also a natural buffer area that would be immediately east of where we would plant the fence. There is also a formal landscape area at the northwest corner of where the fence would be located, and I met representatives from Quick Trip out at the site to choose a location for the fence, and we kind of snaked it through, using like 2 or 3 sections at a time of the fence to kind of snake it through some of the landscaping area, and then run it immediately adjacent to that east property line. The landscaping and trees in that formal landscape area up front by Dungeness Bay, all of them are over 14 feet in height. We're also recommending that fence drop a little bit inside or in height as it gets closer to the driveway exit and entrance on Dungeness Bay, just so it softens the look of it a little bit. So, my recommendation, although Quick Trip would be happy to accommodate the neighbors' request for the much larger fence, or at least they've indicated that so far, it would be our recommendation to not go taller than 10 feet. And we would even suggest that anything over 8 feet should include like a horizontal decorative top element to the fence. Originally, as part of the application, Quick Trip proposed a white fence, and I think there's pictures of it in the packet. That really just does not match any of the features on the property, and all of you know, we look to have those types of accessory features match, the characteristics, materials, and colors of the other structures on the site. So we're recommending a darker brown color to be more consistent with the brick that's part of the C-store and the car wash and the dumpster. In addition, we listed a number of other improvements that'll be made to the buildings and to the site. Things like dampening the horn in the car wash facility, modifying the light that's interior to the car wash. Apparently that was on 24 hours. That will now be motion censored. I think Quick Trip has already started some of this work. There would be some control over when deliveries and services are made on the site. Apparently, there were some refilling of the gas tanks in the overnight hours, or servicing the car wash, in the early morning hours. So Quick Trip has agreed to no longer conduct those services at that time of day. There will also be some landscaping on the east side of the fence to help control light pollution for vehicles that are stacked in the car wash lane. There is a home that is immediately adjacent to that area in the winter months. There's definitely a lack of foliage and a little bit more, visibility into that area. And then the other thing that we, talked about, and the Department of Public Works agreed to, while there is no parking on any of the public streets in the city unless you get specific approval from the police department, there apparently are vehicles, larger vehicles, that are parking on Donges Bay, letting their vehicles idle in order to run into the C-store and back. And so we agreed to add no parking signs along Donges Bay, just for that first block east of the Cedarburg Road Donges Bay intersection. Those will be manufactured, placed, located by this Department of Public Works, so the city will take on that responsibility, hopefully just as a belt and suspenders to prevent that from happening. It sounds like what's also maybe happening is, as those vehicles are idling or coming and going, there's some trash that's being thrown out into the ditch, in public street, and that's contributing to, the annoyance of the trash in the neighborhood. So I think I've summarized what staff's recommendations are. There might be a few other minor things. The representatives from Quick Trip just prior to the meeting said that in their quick research today from a contractor that they use, they were having maybe a challenge of finding the fence that, as staff suggested from a design standpoint, in the height of a 10-foot or an 8-foot to 10-foot height. So, I don't want to design anything on the fly here tonight, because this has been an accumulation of a lot of back and forth and communication to this point. What I would say is, the recommendation from Planning Commission should be that the color and materials are as consistent with the other features on the site. That's consistent with what we've done in other commercial properties. And you can leave the final design subject to staff approval. And if we are not able to come to an agreement, we can come back. And certainly, given our communications, both Quick Trip and city's communications with the neighbors to this point, we would certainly include them in that process and make sure they're comfortable with it. I don't think it would be appropriate to do like a cedar board-on-board fence at this location. It just wouldn't look to the same quality of the other features on the site. So I'm happy to answer any questions that any of you have.
Let's go to the applicant really quick.
Yeah.
If you want to introduce yourself, and if you have any statement that you want to make.
Yeah, I'm Carrie Wiggins. I'm the district leader for the store. I've been working with it for 2 years. And what I could tell you is, if you walked off the adjacent properties in the Woodin area or down by the creek, you would wholeheartedly agree with why the neighbors have been so upset and why she's making the recommendations that she is. I think when we originally built this location, we had no idea that it would turn into the beast that it turned out to be, which is great for business, but it's been quite problematic for the neighbors. They're really wonderful people, and they just want to preserve that Mequon way of life. They have these beautiful homes in these what kind of feels like rural areas with the benefit of being in a city, and that's all they want, is to be able to maintain that. So we've been able to do a lot of the things that were already brought forth, but I think it is really imperative that we get an appropriate fence. Also, for pollution-wise, going into the beautiful river in your city, it's pretty important that we do something to maintain the trash. And even with walking it off daily and going into the woods, there's just no preventing it really from getting there. And the fence is going to be our best barrier.
That's great. Just one brief comment, I'll turn it over to the commissioners. We had several residents come before Common Council, I think it was last month or the month before, and express concern. I can't thank staff enough and Quick Trip enough for being very reactive to that concern, and bringing this forward to us so soon for some level of mitigation. It shows the city's interest in listening to its residents and making sure that we have a peaceful community. Kim, my one main question for you, and it's just a broad overview topic that I want to make sure that commissioners, can kind of have in their discussion is, when we talked earlier, you were concerned about precedent setting. So, can we talk about language and emotion and a reason to possibly vote in favor of this if we so choose tonight, that wouldn't be a precedent setting for everywhere within the city, where somebody just wants a tall fence because they don't want to see the business that goes in next door. I can think of a few things that come to mind, with the river, with the trash and the ongoing problems with the wind and things like that. But can you comment on a couple other things that we could bring to the table?
Sure. I think for starters, we do not have any other car wash facility, gas station facility in the city that's immediately adjacent to single-family residential. Most of those are, adjacent to, if they are adjacent to residential, it's not single-family. And the other, I think, pretty large contributor to my decision, at least in terms of suggesting something greater than 6 feet in height, is that there is that, although not great, there is that 1.5 to 2 foot grade separation between where all of the finished elements of the site conditions are in comparison to where the fence would be located. So you're already, if you stay at the 6 feet in height, you're already, reducing, I guess, what the impact or the intent of that fence would be in the first place.
Great. With that, I'll turn it over to the commissioners. Anybody have questions or comments they wish to make? Commissioner Bach?
With these, and I agree, it was really nice to work with the neighbors. And it's nice to hear that all that work was going on. But with the staff recommendations, are the neighbors comfortable with all of that?
Well, I did reach out to them last week after we did the site visit. We did mark on the site with actual hot pink flags where the fence would go. And I did notify them to take the opportunity to walk the site and, take into account any considerations that they might have. I have not heard from them, and I'm not sure anyone is here tonight or registered to speak on it. So my hope is that after hearing that, walking it, and reading the staff report, that they're pretty comfortable. I do know that, they left the meeting with staff and Quick Trip, feeling, really good about, Quick Trip's willingness to listen to the concerns and to address them. Since that meeting and today, there have been email communications where I've laundry listed the types of things that we were going to look to resolve. And those have all been attempted to be addressed in the staff report.
And then when we were at that meeting, actually the neighbors kind of drew on a map where they would want it to be with their recommendation, which is quite possibly why she didn't hear anything, because I think where they determined it would be goes along with the map they drew in the meeting.
Thank you.
Commissioner Schaefer? Becky Schaefer?
Yeah, agree with the kudos for working together with the neighbors. I would actually be in favor of the 10-foot fence in this case, and I was trying to think to Chairman Strelchuk's point about not wanting to set a precedent, because I never want to go out of the way to set a precedent, but I do think in this case, I think that Kim gave good context in the fact that the adjacent, so the new car wash being something we've already discussed and also adjacent to resident but not single family. I think that this also is a gas station, not just a car wash. So I think that, and I think the one thing that you mentioned that that leads me to want 10 foot instead of 8 is you said that the dumpster is at a height of 9 feet, right? Based on where the grading is. And so that's going to be where I think a lot of your garbage could potentially generate from if it's windy and blowing around. So that at least if it's a foot higher, I mean, you can't control the wind, right, but at least there's a little bit of clearance there that would hopefully prevent some of that So I think it's unique enough that if it were to come forward again, it wouldn't necessarily be, well, you already did this for so-and-so, because there's not a situation in Mequon that would necessarily replicate what we're talking about right now.
Great.
I can make a motion. I don't know if anyone else is ready.
Feel motion's acceptable at any time?
I would move to approve and so I think the way that it was written, based on staff's recommendations with the 10-foot fence in mind, and there's conditions in staff's recommendations specific to that 10-foot fence. So.
Second. We got a motion and a second. Any additional questions? I do have a few. Just wanted to, Kim, you mentioned that the height at the road would be slightly lower. Do you have a quantitative height at the road?
I don't. I would say somewhere between 6 and 8, and maybe we go from the 10 feet and the next section is 8 or 6. I just don't want that area to look like, along the public street, I just don't want it to look like a sound wall. Mm-hmm. A complete barrier to that. 6 feet may not be adequate because as you enter the site where the fence is and that formal landscaping that I talked about, there's like 3 rows of varied landscaping, and the row that's closest to the curb line is actually also bermed up. And so I think we just want to keep that scaled appropriately, right? Like you could do 6 feet and then have this bermed area with 14-foot tall evergreens, and the 6 feet's going to look a little silly and out of scale.
So you're comfortable working with the applicant, and the applicant's comfortable working with you to establish that height at road if we're leaving it variable at this juncture. Another question that I had for both you and the applicant, trash was one of the major concerns and themes that was there, as well as light and sound pollution and things like that. And I do want to highlight that, like, it is a gas station and it is a car wash, but as you remember, like the old PDQs of the day in the olden days, like early Mequon, you'd go there and you'd buy groceries and you'd buy everything else. And I think Quick Trip is all of that and more. So it's a convenience store, it's a gas station, it's a car wash, it's a multi-purpose. Like I can't go to a soccer game without having to stop there on the way back, or a lacrosse game, without having to stop there on the way back. So I just wanted to know, like, the trash mitigation was a major concern. What have you identified was the cause of that in general, and then what have you done to mitigate that at the source? The fence is part of the
majority
issue?
of it is guests who are just, they don't care. Your people who live here care about that, but your guests who are coming in from surrounding communities, they don't have the same level of concern. Mm-hmm. The bags that have gone up in the trees from the dumpster area, I think that's just when they're dumping the trash. So we've tried to increase pickups to help mitigate that. Over the last year, especially the last 3-4 months, the store has had the best trash pickup routine that we've ever had there. And again, if you were to walk off, and I personally walked off our neighbors' properties, you would still, as a homeowner, be personally upset about the amount of trash that was in their property. So we've added additional garbage cans, we've improved trash pickups. We've also, last year, we started, when we have our lawn mowed, we have them bag the clippings instead of just mowing over them, and that has helped, but it still just hasn't done enough for what we need and for what our neighbors deserve.
And the refuse cans at the pumps, you're emptying those at a more regular basis and everything else.
Yeah, they're around. Yeah, we do that. And we're not the ones who are dumping these things. Even in the winter, especially, you'll notice, like, people just don't care about walking it over to the trash can. And it's shameful. But unfortunately, that's out of our control. Picking up the trash is in our control. But it's almost just too much to be able to do what the neighbors need. A nice fence with even some mulch underneath, it would just help contain it all in our property, so that wasn't making it to the river and to the neighbors. So I mean, we've done a lot of what we can change to try to make it better, but even with that, Zach still regularly walks it off and is like, this is more than what it should be.
Okay. Are you comfortable with the staff conditions, the color, and everything else from a Quick Trip standpoint?
Yeah, and her point of view is we'll continue to work together on it, but I think her recommendations, I mean, they make sense for how it should look, and the grading, she'll probably have to determine a little bit more because she knows like how the city would want it to look. Generally at Quick Trip, we just put up those white fences, but especially in that setting, it does make sense why that's not her recommendation to approve that.
And then we've got a motion and a second on the table. Can I ask the motion and the second people to just kind of accept to their motion the non-precedent setting that we have a gas station, convenience store, and car wash immediately located to single-family residential, and that is the reason for this variance from our height.
Accepted.
All right, great. We got a motion and a second. Any other discussion tonight? We call the roll on this one.
Okay. Commissioner Bach,
Aye.
Commissioner Becky Schaefer,
Aye.
Commissioner Stoker, Commissioner Lemke,
Aye.
Commissioner Gentis,
Aye.
Commissioner Hawley,
Aye.
Alderman Parrish,
Aye.
Chairman Stolchek.
Aye.
Vote passes.
Great.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And thanks for your hard work with the residents. We really appreciate it. Next item on the agenda is K&B Investment Group, LLC. The applicant is seeking building and site plan amendment approval to allow for a new lease portion of the building for the property located at 10903 Northwestern Drive, L&A Crystal.
So this is somewhat of an unusual request. Our town center zoning district requires building and site plan amendment approval for any time a single tenant building switches hands, if it hasn't been done within the last 5 years. In fact, I think this is the first time we're actually invoking this ordinance section. So this is the LA Crystal site. This is right on the curve of the Buntrock Weston intersection. So they're looking to sublease most of their site to a graphic design firm, which actually is a permitted use in the town center. So Kim and I actually met out with the owner on site. We took a walk, and eventually this will see probably wholesale redevelopment. So we didn't want to have them put a lot of money and time and effort into redoing the entire site. So we went through and we picked a number of things that we felt were important to actually get cleaned up as part of this process, and we listed them in the report. Basically, we wanted all the outdoor storage to be removed, paint the windows and trim, and replace some non-conforming light fixtures, update the foundation planning, and then there was a tree removal, a dead tree removal. The applicant, the owner, has agreed to do this. In fact, I was out there today, and most of the stuff is already completed. So there's just a few things left. Most of it's the outdoor storage, which will be handled when they relocate their business to Grafton in the near future. So with that, we're supportive of the request, and we recommend approval. Thank you.
Great. I don't see the applicant. The applicant's not here today?
I'm not sure if he was.
Okay. If you wish to come up, you're more than welcome to. Just want to make sure you're included.
Start beating on you.
Yeah, there you go. Do you have any comments that you'd like to make, or
No,
just
I-
here to answer questions as they come up?
That's exactly, you gave us, we talked about, we met on site, there was a list of improvements. Those improvements have all been done except for the full removal of our outdoor storage because we're moving to Grafton. We were supposed to be moving to Grafton 6 months ago, but I think everyone knows how construction goes right now, so we're gonna be moving in the next few weeks. Once we do, this facility is only gonna be for office use for us, so all the storage that's outside now will be in Grafton. So
That's great.
that's the last piece. All the aesthetic changes, touch-ups, landscaping, all were done. Dead tree was removed, stump ground. That's about it. Everything on the list is completed, I believe, other than just outdoor removal, right?
Yeah, there's one question I have about the lights. We could talk about that later.
Okay.
So.
Okay. I don't have any questions, and with that, I can turn it over to commissioners to either ask questions or make a motion.
I'll move to approve.
I would second.
We got a motion and a second on the table. Anybody wish to have any discussion or ask any questions? Okay, with that, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next item on the agenda is Michael Perlowitz. The applicant is seeking preliminary plat, development agreement, and a specimen tree removal approval to allow for a new 7-lot conservation subdivision for the property at the southwest corner of Villa Grove and Friedstadt Road, the green of Mequon. What I'm going to do is I've got a couple people that are registered to speak, but I do want to get staff's overview on this prior to the residents speaking so they can at least hear what staff has to say before they come forward. So if we could just get an overview of what we're looking at tonight, and then I've got a couple people I'll be calling up.
Sure, I have the plat up on the screen. This is a 7-lot conservation subdivision on Villa Grove and Friedstadt. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. We reviewed the zoning change back in November. That was approved by Common Council in January. The 7 lots are served off a private road off of Villa Grove. There was a couple, we did discuss at the rezoning request regarding specimen trees. There's a number of them on the lot. The city forester did recommend the 2 trees on lot 4 to be removed because it impacts the house pad. That actually was ratified in the PUD. We just added the condition to the preliminary plat to have the condition regarding replacement or donation policy. So we're supportive of that. Everything else is pretty much similar to what you've seen before. They are asking for one exception that Kristen can handle with regard to the entrance island sizing, and I'll bring that up on the screen, and she can discuss that if you want to go into further detail on it. They're asking for a waiver to the size of that island. But other than that, we do recommend approval according to the conditions in the report. Thank you.
Great. Is the applicant here? Does he wish to come forward and say hi?
Now it is. Yeah, I think so.
Thanks for coming in. Anything you wish to share? Any statements you wish to make?
Not yet.
Okay. All right, great. Well, you're there and ready for questions. We've got 2 people asking to speak on this. Wendy Porterfield from 3245 Oak Shore Lane. She opposes and wishes to speak. Wendy?
Good evening. I just have a few concerns. I've lived just upriver from Villa Grove Park for almost 30 years now. And Villa Grove Road is the first road barricaded other than Shoreland down near the Highland Bridge when the water gets high. I am concerned about how much fill is coming into that area. And the river, of course, coming up as it always does. I'm also concerned with the amount of boat traffic that has increased and the limited parking in Villa Grove Park, which is really a hidden jewel. I am surprised that the city of Mequon didn't increase their river park, if that was possible, but I don't know what the bottom line there. But 52% of kayak sales increased during COVID, and at my house, 15 minutes don't go by that I don't see 3, 4, 5 kayaks going up the road. These lovely homes will have boats, I'm sure, and just their trailers and cars alone will take up all the parking at the park. I just think allowing this to happen is making 7 people very lucky, and many others not having access to that. It's unfortunate. So that's all I have to speak on tonight, and I felt I should speak my piece, and thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Porterfield. Next person registered to speak is David Schlageter. He is questioning whether he's opposed or in favor, and he does wish to speak.
Yeah, I'd like to speak. I actually don't oppose this development overall. I mean, I just want to see them do it right, and that's kind of why I'm before the planning commission so that we could plan this out, because I'm a little bit concerned even for the developer that and I brought this up the last time, is Villa Grove Road is not really a road. It's a paved piece. It is not wide enough for the pedestrian traffic. It's not wide enough for 2 lanes. So that road, I feel like, should be addressed before we start building there. The other 2 things that I brought up in the past is all the water from the River Club goes underneath Freistadt Road and comes out between lot 2 and 3 onto that property. So if we build on that property, all that water, hopefully it doesn't go west towards the homes that I'm in, is going to go east onto the road and flood the road. And that road does flood to the floodplain. So you're looking at moving that up to the entrance on that road. Again, making that road impassable to people. And I assume if you look at this property, it's below Freistadt, is you're going to bring in fill. And I just saw you approved a fill permit for 5,000 cubic yards. I'm guessing this could be 20,000. Again, once you bring in fill, where does the water go? So my concern too from the property, removing the trees, if they clean up that property, I'll be happy. If they want to get rid of all the dead ash trees, I'll be happy. I assume the city's going to make them plant trees because we're a tree city. But I would really like to see the planning commission deal with, and even the developer look at, what are they going to do about Villa Grove Road, and what are you going to do about the water? The last couple times it's come up, it's like, we'll deal with that later. You know, when they come for a permit, we'll deal with the permit for fill at a later date. We'll deal with the flood water at a later date. Well, if I'm the developer and I spend $1 million on this property, 2 years from now, I don't want to show up and go, you can't put any fill in. You know, when all the neighbors start protesting that the water is going to come into our yards. So again, I'm not against their development. For me, it's probably good for my home value and all that. I'm just worried about, there is a lot of water. That area floods. I've lived here for 35 years. I can tell you exactly where the water goes on that line, and it goes above the floodplain. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Schlageter. I forgot to tell you, he's at 3827 West Freistadt Road, so for the records. And with that, I will turn it over to commissioners for questions. Commissioner Stoker.
This is more for our engineering department. I'm assuming this has gone through all of the proper engineering channels. Can you speak to this flooding and specifically to the water that is currently going between lots 2 and 3? How are they managing that? Is it via ditch? Is it going to be, what is the plan for that?
So they cannot block drainage, so they will have to otherwise incorporate that into the site. So they do have a series of, Jack, does that one have the stormwater? I don't know if you have one with the,
No.
okay. So they do have a series of stormwater facilities that will otherwise be used to address it, but the water will have to follow the overall natural drainage pattern and not block or otherwise redirect the water.
And I'm guessing that post-development, it will be in better shape than pre-development.
They are
Post-development is now.
They are required to release at a rate equal to or less than what it is currently pre-development.
And then I guess in regard to floodplain, the floodplain line is shown on here. Pointer's not really working that well, but the dashed line on there is the floodplain line. And coincidentally, right now, Sewer Pack and DNR, we're looking at modifying the floodplain maps and updating them based on some modeling that was done on the Milwaukee River. For the most part, it's stayed the same. There are a little bit of increased areas, but it's less than a half a foot in most areas. So I don't see the floodplain line changing here to a point where it would impact any building pad.
And then my second question would be regarding Villa Grove Road. Does the city have any plans for that road?
Well, that's our esteemed city engineer again, so I can let her have that.
It is not currently part of the plan to be otherwise improved, but we review that annually, and all of the public are welcome to attend and comment.
Thank you. This is it. So.
I've definitely got a couple questions. A few people reached out to me either via email or phone prior to tonight's meeting. So the watershed was one question. Kristen, welcome back. What I'm looking to understand is that would be directed through sites 2 and 3 as it's currently designed. Leave that in the same direction and manner as it currently is, and it would not increase leaving the property in another direction unless it left through the property and through natural channels for exit. So it wouldn't be diverted to our neighbor on Friedstadt Road. And how do you quantify that now versus later?
Sure. So again, the ordinance requires that the release rate post-development is equal to or less than that of what it is pre-development. So that is exactly how we quantify that. Jim can speak perhaps better to how they're handling the stormwater on site, but we will otherwise require for the natural drainage pattern to be maintained.
Great.
And it also looks like Lot 4 is pretty much the high spot in this plan, so everything will probably shed this way, away from the neighbors.
Which they're, actually, now that I see that, their stormwater facilities are shown on there. So along the rear of the lots on the south is where they otherwise have their stormwater facilities.
Up front here, this is 680 if you can't read that, and then by the time you get down here, it's about 665, so there's about a 15-foot drop. That'll help with the water flow, and then that is consistent throughout that whole cross-section where it basically will shed water to the southeast, looks like. So.
And at this time, the amount of fill was estimated to be less than 1,000 cubic yards, which is what is the trigger for Planning Commission approval.
Okay. And then with regards to Villa Grove Road, several of the concerns that came forward were that road was subpar in width for a standard road. Is that true for a standard subdivision road? Is it less wide?
I don't know. Is the dimension on there, Jack? Is that what it says?
20-foot pavement for Villa Grove.
Oh, so we do allow, 22 is standard, but we do have roads that are 20 feet.
In subdivisions regularly as they get approved when they come in new, or they're just existing legacy from like the 60s?
Both.
Okay. So I just wanted to make sure that was a standard that we at least discussed. If we weren't building roads that were this width, I would ask that it's, we consider requiring that they get widened because there's no accelerate or decelerate lanes with this. Fill totals in anticipation of this plan as it came forward today, are there any, building base set heights where we're showing the lot as it's set out, but then we'd bring in like 6-8 feet of fill because the basement would be elevated? Is there any red flag on that to address the fill concerns of the neighbors downstream?
No, they will otherwise be required to have each individual lot grading plan adhere to the master grading plan, which has the elevations as shown.
Perfect. And then sorry, I just had one more and then I'll call on you. And then the specimen trees was a sticking point for a couple people as well. So if we can talk a little bit to that and where that discussion was with the first time they came forward. I know that there was some
we discussed that at the PUD in November, and basically we wanted to get ahead of it because we knew there were a number of specimen trees out there. And so at the time, if the commissioner or the council had an issue with it, we would have gone back and had them redraw the plan. But it was again adopted as part of the PUD that the 2 trees you see on lot 4 are allowed to be removed. Everything else has to remain as is. I think that's already ratified in the PUD, and I think this approval only basically, again, includes the language based on the replacement value for the site or to donate to our tree fund.
Okay, that'd be great. Commissioner Becky Schaefer?
Okay. Kristen, I think the difference to me about this road is that we're calling it a subdivision road, right? Villa Grove Road is but it's really like a path to a public park. And to the point of the residents, I also live in that area, to the point of the residents who spoke, the popularity of that park has increased exponentially since the pandemic. And so there is a ton more traffic, both boat traffic. So if you think of 20 feet, and of course it's not all the time, but it is frequent enough that there's pedestrians, bikers, people with trailers all trying to use that road. I have concerns about just the sheer volume of traffic, and then adding, 7 homes, again, it's not a lot, but it's all incremental. So you just keep adding and adding, but the road's not getting added to. It just continues to stay as it is, which is already, in my mind, kind of insufficient for the amount of traffic that goes there. I don't know, I think it's such an environmentally sensitive area in that it's close to the river. It already has the proximity to River Club. So from a water and pesticide runoff perspective, that's kind of shot. But it does, the flooding, like, I know what the sign says and I trust the engineering, and yet I also trust what I see every single year, in that this area floods higher than to the point that you're pointing it on the line that says that it's the floodplain. That's just fact. That is just what happens. So there's something that's a little out of line, and it's a concern that we're adding additional impervious surface on an area that's already compromised on an annual basis. So I don't know. I don't even know what I'm asking for. I think it's a concern that I'm hearing from the residents, and that I have myself as a resident in that area, that perhaps what we're planning for and what we think is going to happen, there may be unintended consequences that I don't know how to address it, because I'm not the expert. So this is a little more, I don't want to say an unfounded concern, because I feel like it's founded, but it's anecdotal and it's observational, and yet it's fact. Like the water there, and it has gotten, actually, I would say, worse. I don't know, in the last couple of years. I don't know if what the River Club has done has changed something, but I think that the point at which the water comes up on that road in the spring continues to creep closer to the entrance of that subdivision.
I would just add that, we base that on the data that is given to us from FEMA and DNR. And again, they modeled this in 2007. They're modeling it again right now. Again, it has changed very little, but it has changed. But you have to also recall that these lots, the building pads on these lots are about 8 feet higher than the flood elevation. So I don't see an 8-foot difference between what's modeled and what reality is in terms of flooding. Now, it doesn't say it couldn't happen on a freak 500-year event, but I just can't see how they'd be that far off with regard to the modeling and the land that's out there.
I think it's going to look very much like the river estates, where they're kind of like this, right? That's how the building pads are, and then the water runs off in between. So it's going to be like little.
I think this will be
pillars.
a little less subtle, because it's not necessarily up from the road. So I think it'll be a little less subtle than that.
More subtle or less subtle?
Or more subtle than that, yeah. Less impactful, more subtle, I think. And I think these are smaller lots than those as well. So I don't think you're going to see the size of homes on these pads that you did there.
Any way to move that building pad north on lot 4?
You could, but then you're going to have an issue of grading. I talked to Mike a little bit about because I know former Mayor Avendroth sent an email about trying to protect those trees, and he just didn't think there was a way to regrade that where you're not going to impact those two. And again, and my response was I agree, and I think that's the decision we made when we approved the PUD back in November and January by the council.
Well, I voted against it at that time too. So, okay.
I think we're dealing with a little of that here too. So, additional comments, Commissioner Stoker.
It's not like me to normally ask about trees, but is the responsibility going to be on the lot owner or the developer with respect to the tree removal for lot 4?
That'll be up to the developer, to me.
So the developer will be paying the fee to.
It can go both ways. It depends. In case of Wildwood, which I'm sure you're all familiar with in the past, The developer did not remove any of those trees ahead of time, so he put that on the building owner to decide what they want to remove and not want to remove. If they feel they need to take those 2 trees down as part of their grading of the site, then they'll have to pay the fees and then, either donate it to the fund, or they'll have to provide us additional
I
plan.
think my real question was, if it doesn't get taken down by the developer and we're in here with a building permit, it doesn't matter because it's in the PUD. They have the
ability to do it.
Yes,
Right.
they could keep.
They could keep them. There's nothing that says they have to take them down.
Okay, thank you.
Do you really want to keep the trees down?
Alderman Parrish.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the applicant. I'm fine with this development. I think it's a well laid out project. I understand it's a sensitive area, and every time it gets built on, we kind of give it extra scrutiny, as we should. But it's going to get developed on. It's just a matter of the density. In this case, you have a very large outlot, which also serves for drainage. You have 2 dry ponds, which are corresponding to the stormwater management plan. So it's not 100% perfect, but it seems like we're there. 2 questions. One relates to the width of the road. And typically when there's a dead end, don't we run it by the fire department to make sure they can...
The width of the private road, or
just so that emergency vehicles can get in and out of this, into this subdivision?
Well, the private road's built to since it's more than 4 lots, it has to be built to our public road spec. So there is a cul-de-sac with a turnaround, so it doesn't dead end in a sense.
Okay.
And that has to be built to our spec, which
So
then
the
would allow
cul-de-sac
for...
already addresses the turnaround?
What's that?
The cul-de-sac already addresses
Yes,
the turnaround.
correct.
All right. And then there was a question about the entrance island. I'm not quite, why was it required? I assume the developer doesn't want it because there's some extra cost to it.
The entrance islands are required at all subdivision entrances, and the standard specifications do not distinguish public roads from private roads. So the entrance island is required. The applicant is requesting a reduction in the standard specifications as it relates to the width of the island and the width of the entrance road, which is proportionate with the rest of the road.
And you're okay with that, and that's what's reflected in staff recommendations?
Yes, in fact, we're considering amending the next version of the standard specifications to allow such.
Thank you.
I'm just looking at conditions on the island. Which condition number is the island called out?
I don't have it in front of me.
The island, the cul-de-sac, or the island itself? The entranceway island?
Yeah. In the as we come forward with approvals or not, we just need to know whether we need to call that out to allow for what the developer wants or what it originally was specified. So I just was
Number 18 is the waiver for the island.
So staff is recommending the waiver of the island width?
Yes.
Based on what premise?
And really not a waiver, just a reduction in the requirement to be proportional with the rest of the road.
The width of the island.
Okay. Describe that to me a little differently. You have a standard, but it's a proportional standard that varies? Or is it a standard
that would be what we're recommending going to. The requirement right now is 15 feet. They're requesting 13 feet, and the same reduction for the through lanes on either side. But those requirements are static in the current standard specs, whereas the width of the road can vary depending on what they otherwise install. So this recommendation is consistent with a narrower cross-section that's being proposed.
So it's not precedent setting or anything?
No, it's a waiver of the reduction that you're giving now. Anyone else that came forward would have to ask, but again, we're looking at making it an amendment as a part of the standard specification, so no one would have to request it moving forward.
Commissioners?
I'll make a motion to approve per staff's recommendations.
Second.
Any further discussion? let's call the roll on this one.
Commissioner Bach,
Aye.
Commissioner Gentis,
Aye.
Commissioner Hawley,
Aye.
Commissioner Lemke,
Aye.
Commissioner Stoker,
Aye.
Commissioner Becky Schaefer,
No.
Alderman Parrish.
Aye.
Chairman Strelcheck.
No,
Vote passes 6-2.
the motion passes. Good luck to you. Thank you. Next item is a policy item and an ordinance amending Chapter 58 of the Mequon Municipal Code as it relates to stormwater facilities, maintenance responsibility, and green infrastructure. This is an exciting topic.
I know, speaking of stormwater. We have a proposed amendment that addresses two different things. Stormwater facility maintenance, as you, I'm sure, are aware, our MS4 permit, which is regulated by the EPA and administered by the DNR, requires that the city have a certification program for its stormwater facilities. That requires every 5 years that the stormwater facilities are certified and that the HOA is responsible for maintaining those facilities between certifications. Of course, we are always very diligent for all new development to require stormwater maintenance and easement agreements that define all of those responsibilities. But unfortunately, those from several decades ago were inconsistently approved with stormwater maintenance and easement agreements. So while we feel that the ordinance provides the requirements in place, unfortunately, in administering some of these certification requirements, the legal responsibility has fallen on those lot owners on which the stormwater facilities exist. So this ordinance essentially corrects that and would otherwise apply that in the absence of a homeowners association, that the responsibility is equally shared by all lot owners within the subdivision. While we were doing an amendment, it was also an opportunity for us to catch up the stormwater ordinance as it relates to green infrastructure requirements. 2 years ago, MMSD implemented some green infrastructure requirements for the addition of impervious surface between 5,000 and less than a half acre in subdivisions where there isn't an existing, well, actually it doesn't have to be in a subdivision, for developments that are not already under a stormwater maintenance and easement agreement. This proposed update just includes the pass-through of those requirements, which we are otherwise required as a MMSD community to administer. And it also addresses a reduction in the drainage financial guarantee. Right now, the drainage financial guarantee is really intended to be for subdivisions or larger developments. And we've been passing that burden through to what's really at this point been single-family homeowners that are required to post that drainage financial guarantee. We still find value in the drainage financial guarantee. That's the only clause that we have to ensure that the facilities are installed per the approval. And again, as we are otherwise required to administer, we're just suggesting that if the Planning Commission recommends approval of the ordinance, that it would be accompanied at the Common Council level with an amendment to the fee schedule to set a standard fee for the drainage financial guarantee for green infrastructure rather than having it scaled based on the improvements that are required for the site.
Commissioner Stoker.
How many of these old HOAs are we looking at that we really don't have control over? Is it a couple? Is it dozens?
It's probably closer to it. It's less about the ones that we don't have stormwater maintenance and easement agreements for, and more about those that are willing to do so, or those that all point to the homeowner where the stormwater facility lies. So we have a legacy of at least 7 that we've struggled to otherwise get certified, and at this point, the responsibility is falling onto single-family homeowners.
Wow. And when you say that, that assumes that we're enforcing something, because I'm guessing these single family, those, in the cases where it's the single family bearing the brunt of it, they probably didn't even know.
Correct. So the program, well, since I've otherwise been there, has come through 2 certification cycles. They're every 5 years. And so we've now been through all of the subdivisions. We also had an inventory done as a part of a grant project a couple years ago that identified some that weren't otherwise in our system that we've now been able to get through a full cycle of otherwise catching up on. And the default would otherwise be that if the responsible party, however defined, does not complete the certification, that the city would do so on their behalf and special charge them. And at this point, that would be against a singular homeowner rather than against all of the lots within the subdivision. So we're also looking to have some equity assessment. They certainly all benefit from the stormwater facility. The subdivision wouldn't otherwise have been approved absent those. And again, this isn't really an issue moving forward because we have different administration of the ordinances in place. We're really just trying to address that gap in some of those legacy projects that haven't otherwise been holding up their end of the bargain. And frankly, when our new permit goes into effect in April, could result in some issues for the city.
Another question, and probably not the right. I'm going to ask a question, and I'm going to be real curious to see your answer.
Oh, great.
So first of all, it was a 2-part question. The fee for the green infrastructure on a single-family residential lot. Any idea what kind of fee that's going to be from a dollar standpoint?
We're going to go through and do an analysis. So we had included the range of what we've seen to date, and that's been anywhere between $4,000 and $16,000. So what we're trying to determine is whether we'll have a scaled rate so that, those with more green infrastructure should in theory have a larger drainage financial guarantee. Really, the problem right now is that MMSD and really green infrastructure in general, there are plenty of tools available on the internet. It does not require a registered engineer, but right now our drainage financial guarantee does. So we're otherwise obligating people to really hire an engineer just for a cost estimate because they really don't need it to design the green infrastructure. But absent engineer completing a cost estimate, there's less of an industry standard in terms of trying to determine what the cost is of the installation, which is why we were suggesting going to a flat fee. So we're going to do a little bit more analysis based on either the amount of impervious surface or the size of the lot to determine if maybe there should be kind of a scaled version of the fee, but that it would be less than what is otherwise required, but still enough to make sure that everybody installs what is otherwise required.
So my question is, and just so you all know, a 5-acre parcel, one single family home, call it a 3,000 square foot ranch. I'm not talking about a 13,000 square foot mansion, and a 125-foot driveway is now going to need to spend tens of thousands of dollars, and that's a fact. Those are real numbers. We have to hire an engineer. I'm going through it for a second time in Mequon now for this green infrastructure. This is absurd, and it's ridiculous that we're putting this on our residents. For a 3,000 square foot home and a driveway, you're exceeding the amount of impervious material. So if there's a way we can get it without having to go through the engineers, that's a huge step in the right direction, and I would be super supportive of that. Rain gardens are great. If there's ways we can increase the impervious surface allowed. But I've got a case in Mequon now. It's going on a 10-acre lot, a 4,000 square foot house with a 125 or 140 foot driveway. It's not going to make it. It's just crazy, and the costs they're real. I mean, we're not talking about telling the customer it's going to cost you $1,000. First of all, they got to have the engineering. Then they have to spend the money to fix the problem, and it can literally be tens of thousands of dollars. So it's crazy to me. On a 10-acre parcel, I'm building a 3,000 square foot house, and you're going to make me for green infrastructure, which, of course, I know there's certain people that are more pro green infrastructure than myself. The consequences and the costs that are going to put into these, And if there's someone in this room that can tell me that a 3,000 square foot house with a 150 square foot driveway on a 10 acre parcel is causing any problems to the environment, I would welcome the challenge. It's ridiculous. So anyhow, just be advised, it's real, and these are real costs that our future building customers in the city of Mequon are going to have to pay, and more regularly. So anyway, that is of course one person's opinion. I know I got a smile over here.
In case we were wondering what that was, right?
Anyhow.
Alderman Parrish.
Sure. It's Commissioner Stoker's point, that's being imposed on us by the MMSD though, correct? That's not like this is up for discussion.
I realize that.
All right, thank you. All right, because
It is new.
this commissioner relies on your recommendations.
2 years,
Builder here, so. Okay, good. I hope you feel like you vented. I have had some residents go through this situation actually where just the past practices by the city aren't in compliance with current MMSD standards, and it really does create this. It's a scary situation for them. They have thousands of dollars of engineering costs that are suddenly imposed to prove that they're in compliance with the MMSD requirements. But again, that's not up for a discussion. It's like, how can we improve the experience? In those cases where there wasn't an HOA and there's like the shared pond or rain garden for the benefit of multiple parcels, I presume there's no like easement in place or drainage easement. Like, what right do these other homes even have to be draining onto that property to begin with? I don't.
This is where the city attorney loves when I say, I am not in.
Yeah, this is just it's really messy. This stuff,
It is
so.
very messy, which again, we have had the benefit in several, in fact, I think it was tonight. Yeah. So another example is the approval on the consent agenda for the addition of the daycare. That's actually a site that has stormwater facilities, but does not have a stormwater maintenance and easement agreement. And tonight you approved as a condition of approval that they now be required to have one. So we are otherwise trying to take opportunities where there aren't ones to work with property owners to get one, so that we're otherwise addressing it. This ordinance would just otherwise address either those that we haven't had the opportunity to, or those that don't really have a reason to at this point.
And then I have another scenario. Pretend like there's 6 houses that are theoretically being serviced by a large rain garden or pond, and let's say one of these homeowners is refusing to participate in any costs or compliance measures. I mean, they haven't had to do so for the last 50 years, and all of a sudden we're saying, all right, you got to be in compliance. They're not part of an HOA. So it's just 7 random homeowners that need to form an agreement to share a cost. So what if some of them don't participate?
Well, what I don't want to happen is that the city ultimately becomes the administrator, does it on their behalf, and then charges them for it. But that is the ultimate default if that doesn't happen.
Them and Ed, can you clarify what them meaning all 7 homes, or them
Correct.
meaning the single home?
No,
Okay,
with the ordinance change, it would be all 7. Absent the ordinance change, it would be 1.
But theoretically, if the one homeowner who refused to participate, we would just say, fine, then you need to go install your own rain garden, right?
No, we would do it on their behalf and then special charge and add it to their tax bill.
Okay. No further questions.
So, as an alderman, I've gotten several questions on this. My HOA was one of them. This came up where we had the ordinance in place, but we weren't following up on the inspections as regularly. And I think it was about, 4 or 5 years ago, we reminded everybody that this was a requirement because we're having water issues in the city that didn't seem to be addressing. So we were reminding everybody that these stormwater retention ponds needed to be recertified, and going through that whole process. And I had several people reach out. I had one guy with literally a dry spot in his backyard that would fill up maybe once a year, and then be dry the rest of the year. He was required to get it recertified, and it was thousands of dollars, and it was ending up on him to do it. So it is a real problem within the city, and it is something that, you know, definitely, like, we do need to address. My premise for this entire thing and things similar to it, if, you know, we just approved a 7-lot HOA, you know, 7-lot subdivision with stormwater ponds in it tonight. Recertification of our 2 ponds in my subdivision, I think, was $4,000 or $5,000. So they're real expenses that do come up on a regular basis, and to have that, and that's with no correction being required. We had to get rid of a couple muskrats and do a couple things, you know, legally trap them and get rid of them so they weren't depleting the banks on them. But they're real expenses that could really end up on one person. So, you know, I'm glad to see this. I guess my question for you is, if a subdivision going in is required to have a stormwater detention pond as a subdivision, why in any circumstance would it land on a single resident anyway? You know, they weren't the house that decided to put the pond in there. That was a requirement to build the subdivision itself. So can you answer, like, where that difficulty is coming in for those residents that have reached out to me, and would love to hear the answer tonight?
Well, again, absent a stormwater maintenance and easement agreement, and if it wasn't constructed in an outlot and it is legally on someone's lot, then there is no other recourse. I mean, again, absent something else that gives us the legal authority to share that responsibility amongst multiple properties, we don't, which is why we're presenting this ordinance to otherwise allow for such.
Okay.
That's
Commissioner Gentes.
Yeah, that's where I was kind of mulling this over and thinking, how is this going to play out? It almost sounds like Alderman Parrish referenced eminent domain. I'm drawing a blank on the concept, but the concept of a regulatory taking, in effect.
It's already there. I mean, we're not taking anything. We're just sharing the responsibility that is already obligated for the stormwater facility.
What I'm wondering, though, is to the point that Commissioner Strelchik made, if you've got an existing subdivision with stormwater facilities in that subdivision, presumably there's the documents that govern that subdivision.
That's where we're saying there's not.
And so how many existing subdivisions are there where there isn't a HOA agreement or an association in existence that is regularly meeting and addressing issues like recertification of the stormwater facilities
That are meeting?
that are not.
Oh, well, I know of 7, to be off the top of my head, but again, there are plenty that don't have HOAs that do just find a way to all work together and equally share the cost. So we're not really requiring the formation of an HOA. We're just requiring the responsibility to be evenly split amongst all of the benefiting properties.
And the city attorney has weighed in on this as not subject to litigation?
The language was generated by an attorney, not by an engineer, so.
I just question whether there isn't an opportunity for I see why we're doing it. I think it makes sense to spread that cost. It's equitable, but I'm not sure that, I'm just questioning whether the city ultimately has the authority to force that issue on people who are private landowners at that point. There may be holdouts and that's an issue for them, but I'm seeing the risk for litigation here that may be another unintended consequence that we're not. I guess I'd like to know that issue's been addressed.
The concern about we can be sued for anything, unfortunately.
Right.
It's not a question that we can answer today, but I think it would be good for the common council to be advised as to those types of issues by the city attorney when this comes before the common council.
He drafted the language, so we've had this issue. We've been working with him on the 7 legacy ones that we otherwise had, and this is the method that was recommended to be able to address those.
What's really interesting is some of our stormwater management for some new subdivisions are requiring each lot to have rain gardens on them. For example, Ranch Court and Mequon had that. So when I bought those lots in there, it was up to each individual homeowner, and I went in and changed the deed restrictions in the subdivision that it was an HOA issue, because you'd have 4 different homeowners at different times having to have different inspections. So there's easements on each lot for the HOA to go in and inspect those every 5 years, and you put it on burden on the HOA.
Right, that's what I expect to see.
That's the only way to go. I mean, from a maintenance standpoint, to try and
Well, we have other subdivisions, including 2 recently, that were approved exactly that way, that the road itself did not meet the threshold to otherwise require stormwater management. So they are making one green infrastructure facility for the road, and then otherwise requiring each individual property owner to address it at the time of construction.
And that's what, again, I was for individual owners versus make it the HOA. And one of the challenges we have, because I think in Mequon is HOA last 20 years or 25 years. What happened after 20 years when these people are going to have no idea. It's going to be a third owner. They're not, I understand there's an HOA fee when I move in, and then 3 years from now, the HOA doesn't exist anymore. They're probably thinking, I don't have to spend that $1,300 or $1,500 a year. And then there's going to be a day when these HOAs expire, and I know several of them have. Who's really going to manage it?
And we have gone through several rounds of that where, in some cases, even just the transition from the developer to the HOA, that the HOA didn't read the governing documents or wasn't otherwise anticipating. And the ultimate goal is compliance. So if the DNR is not listening, we are patient, and we do otherwise try and work with the subdivisions. It's not in our best interest to be punitive. So we do otherwise move forward with the goal of compliance, but ultimately the city and the taxpayers will be held responsible. So if the individual property owners are not, then the taxpayers of Mequon will be, because it is a federally mandated requirement that we otherwise have this. So absent that, then the general taxpayers have to pay for that. Wait.
Alderman Parrish.
Thank you. Maybe just have the city attorney look into the language where it says, so if a homeowners association, or if it ceases to exist and no specific owners are specified in any recorded document, the responsible party shall be each lot in the subdivision or each condominium unit. And I think it's maybe missing something like that is required to abide by the MMSD, or that is being serviced.
Yeah, so unlike green infrastructure, this has nothing to do with MMSD. I can
Where
ask.
do you define the bound? Because that says every home in a subdivision would need to contribute to that cost, but wouldn't it be those utilizing the rain garden or the pond?
Yeah, so the subdivision in this case is a legal term that would actually reference the legal document that was used to create the land division. That's why it also indicates condominium. So they're speaking to those legal documents that are included in that it would be split amongst all of the lots within that subdivision or that condominium. Or obviously in a condominium, it's a unit owner then, not a lot owner, but.
Kristen, how do we handle, or how would we handle a situation where we've got a smaller subdivision, maybe 5 to 7 lots, or a 10 to 12 lot subdivision, and you've got one person that's just not contributing to HOA? And if they can't afford.
The HOA's, problem to otherwise address.
Yeah. And if they didn't do that, when the city just go in and just assess, at that point? Like, do the
If
work
they-
and then charge everybody in the subdivision equally?
If they defaulted, yes, and I think I alluded in here that this is just a stopgap because of our new permit. We actually have to do quite a significant change to our stormwater ordinance. We're just otherwise trying to at least be able to address the legacy ones while we go through that process. But the proposed language would actually assess not only the fees but a penalty, because we don't want there to be an incentive for homeowners to default and not do anything and have the city do it on their behalf. We are not staffed, we are not able to handle, and we would not be cheap. And so it will be disincentivized with a penalty in addition to that, to try to ensure that whether it's an HOA or just a group of lot owners, that it is certainly in their best interests to work together to find a way to make it work rather than just default and have the city have to do it in their place.
That's a strong statement considering, like you just said, our goal is compliance. And that's usually how the city does. They allocate what it costs.
Penalty from the EPA is much worse, and our audit was not kind, so.
Okay, good. Yeah, I was just wondering. I've had that come up in multiple conversations where either the HOA is disbanded, they don't have a vehicle in which to collect funds, or they've got several people that when they tried to get back together, they couldn't get them to contribute. Therefore, the other homeowners just felt it unreasonable to foot the bill for everybody else involved. It's a rule which was there and existing and needed to be in compliance, but also one that was kind of brought back up after some time of not being enforced. So there were just some people that had concern as to how that would happen and if there's any opportunities for the city to help out with gaining that compliance with some people that just had different opinions. A small 5 to 7 subdivision HOA suing 2 people who don't want to pay and want to run it through the courts typically is a lot more expensive than just writing the check to do your stormwater maintenance, on your own. So it's unfortunate that people in buying a house plan on that dollar amount and then there's no vehicle in which to have any assistance from the city. So.
How was all this communicated to the residents and homeowners associations and these changes so that you can be kind of proactive on some of this stuff?
Well, again, now we're great about doing so. We have stormwater maintenance and easements agreements that are recorded against the title for every single property. So anyone that does their due diligence would otherwise be made aware of the requirement. The stormwater management plans are not only approved by the city, but also by MMSD. And those are also available to otherwise do so. The certification, unfortunately, will really vary based on what facilities they have. If there's one single pond, then typically that would be less than if there are a series of 17 rain gardens that are otherwise used. So that is a consequence of how the developer ultimately constructs the subdivision to begin with. But typically, at the rate that we see most developments develop, there is a progression between where the developer is initially responsible before that transitions to the HOA. So unlike what happened in the beginning of the administration, most HOAs should be well aware of what the cost is long before the certification is due. So they should have 5 years worth of dues to collect that $15,000 to $4,000 from all of the lot owners within the subdivision. So it's not as though it's, a 1 year, one-time thing that sneaks up on them. They should have plenty of time to otherwise budget for it. And again, we went through cycles where they didn't, and it was the first time, and it was a shock to the system, and it was large dollar amounts for real property owners, and we did what we could to work with all of them. But that is not something that anyone in a modern subdivision can otherwise claim.
Yeah, Kristen, what do you need from us today? A motion to
Yes.
recommend to the council
Yes.
as shown? Any additional? Yeah, I think we've talked about it. We've expressed our concerns. There's nothing that we see. I'm not hearing anything that we're seeing that we can change in what we've seen or anything that we have wording to change.
the city attorney does, just in case anyone doesn't know, approve it as a matter of course before it gets to the council.
So I guess what we're seeking is a motion to recommend to the council as written, unless there's changes you'd like to recommend.
I will make that motion. Second.
So you got a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. All right. All right. Announcements. Next meeting is Monday, July 25th, 2022 at 6 p.m. And a reminder that there is no August meeting. That is usually. Yep. And then one final motion for the meeting.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned.